think you guys will relate to this because it happened recently. When my house burned down because of the golf cart battery exploding on March 13th, 2023, it was not the easiest thing. I was discouraged many times and felt broken, but then I remembered, this world is not my home, as 2 Corinthians 5:1 states, for we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. I also reflected on Romans 8:28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Paul writes through our hardships we grow stronger and our faith becomes more strengthened. And Matthew 5 states, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Did I mourn? Yes, I'm human. But God showed me how nothing is impossible. When the demolition crew finally arrived at my house, it was sad to witness. My garage had the most damage done. The trusses had fallen in, and the smell of smoke was awful. My friends and neighbors complained about the smell of smoke. They weren't mad, but they couldn't believe how the smell lingered for weeks and weeks. I had so many things in my garage, tools, brakes, ladders, an air compressor, pressure washer, and generator, to name a few. My cars were burnt, and it appeared that everything inside was gone. I had wooden shelves in the front of the garage that I used for storing totes or bins. My totes consisted of Christmas and holiday decorations, photo albums, photos, an artificial Christmas tree, and anything that couldn't fit in my closets. And they ended up in a tote out in the garage. I just put them up there, but I was organized. Everything had a label on it, so I know exactly which one to pull when I was looking for something. I knew all these things were replaceable, but the one bin I knew I could not replace was the white bin that contained special awards, diplomas, drawings, pictures, and all the highlights of my husband's life as an architect. It also had some pictures of his childhood and special vacations. That white tote was used as part of his display at his celebration of life. I would always have a picture of those things in my memory, but I knew that those items would mean more to my daughter Allie as she grew up. That was one bin, that one thing that could not be replaceable. Weeks went by, the cleaning crew worked on taking things down and putting them all in dumpsters. So many dumpsters that I lost count, but the neighbors were counting and watching and kept me informed. Then one day, they finally saw the floor in the garage. It was charred and nasty. The smell of smoke was still horrendous. It felt like we were finally accomplishing something. They sure were. They discovered a family of raccoons living in my garage. Just think, free rent. I was not happy when they told me I had to get the family out before they could proceed. Of course I responded with, dear Lord, why me? My mission was to find someone to trap or remove the family. Where do I begin? I had a list of possible options. The next morning, the crew came and said, good news, the freeloading raccoon family decided to move out on their own, evicted with the help of God. Now, that is not the miracle I want to talk about, but that was a miracle. I have to share one that's much bigger. A few days later, the crew knocked on my door and said they found something, and they said, I think you should look at it. I couldn't imagine what it would be. There was a corner in the front of the garage that was somewhat intact. I think the firefighters had gotten their hose there and saved that small portion of space in the garage. With nothing else around it, there, staring at me, was the white bin that contained all the special things of my husband's celebration of life and beyond. It was covered in smoke and soot, but it was not burned. It was still closed,
And even though it wasn't exactly white, I recognized it. I had tears of joy. The crew brought the bin out into the driveway, and I just stared at it. How in the world did it survive? Everything around it had burned. All the other bins were gone, melted, no sight of them, but yet my white bin stood there. It was yellow, it was stained, but it wasn't ruined. But no, I opened it up, and nothing, not a trace of anything. Everything was in exactly the way it had been since his celebration of life back in June of 2015. I didn't even need to dust any of it off, which is not like in the inside of my house. It had everything in its place, and everything looked great. All I had to do was buy a new white bin. Just how did the bin survive when all the bins around it had burned up? Not one bin survived the fire. So, yet this one white bin was saved. An unbeliever would have answered based on the wind and the wind velocity or some scientific theory. But for me, it was the Lord my Savior. Matthew 19:26 states it. But Jesus looked at them and said, "With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible." It may not be in the same context of what happened to me when Matthew was talking about Jesus, but we all know that with God, all things are possible. So another miracle in my life. God saved what was left of my husband's best part of his life. I also need to add, I had some of Rich's ashes in that bin. I had been saving a small amount of the ashes for cremation jewelry, which I already have. But that small number of ashes were a part of him that I could replace, and the others are in an urn back in Wisconsin. I will be forever thankful that I still have a part of Rich with me. And once again, I was shown another of God's miracles.